Hi, I'm Alistair from Power Plants Australia, and today I want to share with you some information around the Priva GroScale, which is a great tool for managing your irrigation strategies automatically based on weight. The GroScale is a tool that's been designed by Priva in Holland, and Power Plants is Australia's full-service provider to distribute, install and support customers with this product. Our head office and factory is based in Hallam, Victoria, with technicians and a sales team distributed across Australia. Power Plants are a Priva full-service provider and have been operating for 27 years. And a little bit about myself. I grew up in New Zealand and was always interested in the connection between technology and plants. I started building small automated greenhouses when I was 17 years old, and then studied engineering and worked in greenhouses. I moved to Australia to work for Power Plants in 2011, and have now been working for Power Plants for 10 years. And these days I manage the Control and Water Systems division at Power Plants. So why use GroScales? Well, if we look at the most common way of irrigating, which is time-based irrigation, we have a fixed start time every day. We then have fixed irrigation intervals. So we might wait every hour to get an irrigation. And then we have a fixed stop time. So we might stop at 6 p.m. This way of irrigating doesn't take climate or weather into account. So if our conditions are changing and our plants need more or less water, that's not acknowledged in time-based irrigation. So in summary, it will allow you to grow a crop, but manual changes must be made constantly based on the climate and weather. The grower must predict what the plants need and make those changes every day, if not multiple times per day. And the grower needs to do lots of manual drip and drain checks to see if the plants need more or less water. The next step up from time-based irrigation is irrigation based on time and light levels. You often still have a fixed start time every day, but the time between your irrigations throughout the day can be changed based on light levels. And then often you also have a fixed stop time. So in summary, irrigation based on time and light now takes one of the 4 drivers of transpiration into account. Minimum maximum times must be set and adjusted so that the plants don't get over-irrigated if it's too sunny, or under-irrigated if it's cloudy and it never gets to the light accumulation set point at all. And lots of manual drip and drain checks are still required. Because we're only taking one of the 4 drivers of transpiration into account, we can't rely completely on the sunlight sensor to determine the best time to irrigate the crop. So when we're talking about the different drivers of transpiration, solar radiation is the main one. But there's also other drivers of transpiration. Another one is temperature. It could be a cloudy day, but it could be hot, and in which case the plants are going to transpire more. If the wind speed is higher, if it's a windy day or a windy night, the plants will transpire more than if it was still. And humidity makes a difference as well. Dry conditions often lead to plants needing more water, and humid conditions mean that the plants often need less. But how can we take all 4 of these different drivers of transpiration into account? Should we come up with some kind of complex calculation with sensors for solar radiation, temperature, wind speed and humidity, giving a factor for each one of them to try and determine how much water plants are actually taking? One very simple way of determining the influence of all these different drivers of transpiration is just to weigh the crop. And we have the unique opportunity to do this when we grow crops in substrate. 1 mil by definition is 1 gram. So it doesn't matter whether the plants are absorbing water because it's sunny, or because it's hot, or because it's windy, or because it's dry. So what do GroScales look like? Well, they can be set up in different ways for different crops. On the left, you can see an advanced blackberry crop. And on the right, you can see the setup for a strawberry crop. The system comprises of a drain tray that holds a representative sample of the crop. The tray allows the water that drains out of the bottom of the pots to drain from one end to the other. There it is collected in a drain box, where there is a tipping spoon that measures the quantity of drain runoff. A scale is put under either end of the tray so that it becomes balanced, and it can also take an average of these 2 scales. The information from the scales and the drain box is wirelessly transmitted back to the computer, where the software is determining the best thing to do at any given moment during the day. You can have multiple GroScales on your system. So if you have different crops, you only need to buy an extra GroScale, and this will wirelessly transmit back to the receiver that you've already installed. So how do GroScales work? Well, the first thing they do is they determine the best time to irrigate for the first irrigation of the day. And this is based on the transpiration rate. The transpiration rate is how much water the crop is drinking at any given time. When the plants are in the early morning stage, there's no transpiration or very minimal because the sun hasn't yet come up. However, when the sun comes up, we see a dip in the weight. And because the system is always monitoring the rate of transpiration or the rate of water being absorbed by the crop and transpired, it is able to determine the best time to irrigate, which is only when the plants have opened up their leaves and stomata. This prevents guttation, which is a condition when the plant's not yet ready to receive water, but an irrigation is given. And because the pot is dry and often has a high salt content, it forcibly pushes the water up through the roots, through the stem, and out the leaves. And this results in water beading on the leaves, which can lead to disease issues. The transpiration rate to trigger the first irrigation of the day can be adjusted on the system. So what will happen? Well, when we irrigate based on the transpiration rate, if it's a sunny or a windy or a dry day, it will irrigate earlier in the day. And if it's cloudy or foggy or cold, then it will irrigate later in the day, automatically. And just like humans, if you tried to force feed us when we were still asleep, our bodies probably wouldn't appreciate it. And plants in that way are similar. They need to wake up before they get food and water. In reality, every day is different and the conditions change every day. So we should always be irrigating earlier in the day when the conditions are right, and later in the day when the conditions aren't conducive for plants to start growing. The next step is wetting up, and this is based on a setting for weight gain and minimum rest time. So after the first irrigation of the day, we want to wet the crop up until it gets drained. We don't want to do this too quickly or have drained too early in the day, and this can also lead to channeling inside the media. But we don't want to wet up too slowly either. Otherwise, we won't have drain by the time that we need it, or we might never get to drain. The minimum rest time is there as a safeguard, so that in a situation where we have multiple valves on a system, it can't irrigate too frequently on the valve linked to the GroScale. Otherwise, the rest of the crop might not have time to get watered in between. The rate of water increase can be set based on the dryback in the morning and comparing that to the saturation target that we want for the crop. Then dividing that across the number of hours we want to wait until we achieve saturation. Once we hit saturation, the system goes into the drain period. The drain period is designed to give a certain number of irrigations whilst constantly monitoring the drain runoff of the crop. As it does this, the number of mils increases, and a setting can be set to say that we want a certain number of mils of drainage within the drainage period before we move to the next period where we start to dry back. This is when we start to get our 24-hour drains. There are two functions that setting the amount of water that we want in the drain period achieves. One is that it achieves evenness throughout the whole block. We are only measuring a sample of the whole block, which is the crop that's on the GroScale. However, often for berry substrate crops, there is quite a lot of variation in the block. You can have some pots in the leg rows where it can be hot and dry and sometimes directly exposed to the sun. And then right in the middle of the tunnels, you might find that it's quite humid. We want to put the GroScale somewhere where it's most representative. So not right at the edge, but also not right in the middle, probably about a third of the way in. However, when we achieve saturation on the scale, that doesn't necessarily mean that the whole block has been saturated. The way we get around this is to give extra irrigation. There's no harm if the crop where the GroScale is gets a little bit more saturated. You can't get any more saturated than saturation. However, there's a benefit to be gained if the leg rows haven't achieved saturation by giving a few extra shots until we're confident that the leg rows have also achieved saturation. The second function is a lot of growers like to target a certain 24-hour drain range. By asking for a little bit of extra drain, our 24-hour drain total starts to build up. Later in the day, subsequent irrigations in the dryback period won't add to the 24-hour drain total, so adjusting the amount of drain we want to achieve in the drain period allows us to get close to our 24-hour drain target. A common question that we get is that if the system uses weight to determine how much irrigation the crop needs, what happens if the weight changes? Of course, the weight changes whenever the crop grows or whenever we do tasks like picking, leafing, or pruning. Well, the answer is that the crop cannot be any heavier than when it's totally saturated with water. The full weight of the crop at that point is a fully wet pot, along with the full weight of the plants that are in the pots on the scale. If the crop has grown overnight, the total saturated weight of the pot and the plant will increase. But because the dryback settings of the system are all subtracted from the saturated weight, which is recalibrated every day, the amount of dryback from the new higher saturated weight will still be the same as the previous day. By calibrating the saturated weight in this way, we are offsetting any fluctuations in weight of the crop, and instead only focusing on the weight difference of the substrate media itself in terms of its water holding capacity. Once the drain period has been completed, the system then goes into the dryback period. This is when we ask for a fixed amount of dryback before we're happy to give further irrigations. The purpose of the dryback period is to ensure that the crop is not saturated in the afternoon, but it's getting enough irrigation to maintain the moisture level required in the pot. The dryback setting can be adjusted on the system, and you can ask for more or less dryback depending on the way you're trying to steer your crop. The system also has a setting for the nighttime dryback that you want to achieve. It will automatically stop irrigations in the afternoon in order to achieve this. It does this by monitoring the rate of water loss or transpiration. If it determines that it's going to overshoot the dryback target for the evening, it will stop the irrigation. However, if it's a hot afternoon and if it can see that the rate of water loss is excessive, it will continue to give irrigations right up until the last minute, so it can then dry back to the evening dryback target. On sunny, windy, or dry days, the system will continue to irrigate well into the afternoon. However, on cold days with very little light, the system will automatically stop irrigating earlier to give the media a chance to dry out before the evening. This prevents the media from being saturated in the evening and over the night, where the lack of oxygen can lead to root diseases. The GroScale also has a flushing option. When irrigating on substrate, sometimes salts build up. This salt buildup is a lot less prevalent when using a GroScale because the plants are only getting water when they need it. So, however, on a day if you would like to flush some salts out, you can automatically set the system to rinse out, which uses a higher drain total for the drain period that the system must achieve. This allows the salts to be flushed, and the system automatically puts itself back to the original drain total that you normally ask for. The next day, you don't have to come in and change it back. So what does it all look like together once these settings are set? Here is a graph taken from a grower's computer who's using a GroScale. You can see that before the first irrigation in the morning, the weight dips down, and it's triggered by the transpiration rate. The irrigations then follow the blue line, which is the ramping period that allows the crop to slowly wet up from the dryback target overnight to achieve saturation. Once saturation has been achieved, successive irrigations are given until the drain total that the customer has sent has been achieved. Once the drain total has been achieved, you can see that the system then starts to dry back to the blue line. There are 2 irrigations in the afternoon, and then the system calculates that based on the evening dryback that it needs to stop irrigating now, otherwise it won't achieve it. And we can see that the red line slowly decreases down into around the 79.5 kilo mark, which is where the blue line is for the evening, which is the calculated weight of the system. So what are the benefits of using a GroScale system? When we use a time and solar-based system, we can only guess at the amount of water that the plant really needs. Because we're not taking into account the three other drivers of transpiration, the safest thing to do is to give a little bit more water than the plants actually need. This leads to root growth that is not as prolific as if you had given the exact amount of water that the plant really needs. The roots just get lazy and won't go in search of the water if you give them too much. So with a GroScale system, the plants end up being able to transpire more water because they have a bigger root system. This leads to a greater nutrient uptake, more growth, and more production. The plants can cool themselves better on a hot day when they've got more roots because they can transpire more water, which lowers stress levels. Fruit quality is improved and problems of soft fruit are reduced by avoiding guttation, which is when the first irrigation of the day is timed too early. Plant health is improved as stress is decreased, along with disease associated with unhealthy roots, especially overnight if the substrate is left too wet, which can happen if you can't measure the dryback of the crop. Inputs are better utilised as the plants are being irrigated with the exact amount of water and fertiliser that they really need. These pictures show two raspberry plants that were planted in the same block, where half the block is irrigated based on time and solar, and the other half is irrigated with a GroScale. As you can see, compared to the picture on the left, the picture on the right, which is the one grown with the GroScale, shows much more prolific root growth. And this is due to giving the exact amount of water the crop needs. The roots go in search of water. So that's the theory behind the benefits of a GroScale. But what do customers who have it actually tell us about it? They often mention things like they don't have to constantly monitor all their drain stations, so they have more time in the day to focus on their crop. The GroScale picks up on rapidly changing water requirements when fruit forms. There's a reduction of disease compared to previous times when the irrigation was not well managed. Often they mention that if the media dries out too much at night time on a warm night, the system can automatically give an irrigation which keeps a minimum moisture level in their pots to keep their crop safe. And that the culmination of benefits that the GroScale offers has kept them ahead of the curve, leading to better results each season. So what does the setup look like? Surely a system like this is really complicated. While there are a number of settings that have to be set, such as the ones that we've discussed during this presentation, and while Priva offers a nicely laid out program that allows you to enter settings easily and make adjustments per your requirements, PowerPlants has developed a GeoVision page that summarizes all these settings in one easy to use graphic where the settings can be entered and the relevant information is displayed on the screen. On this overview page, you can always see what your system is doing and easily change set points if you should require. So the GroScale is a very thorough tool that allows us to directly measure the transpiration rate of the crop and respond to it with scheduling appropriate irrigation. However, moisture sensors are something that a lot of people know about and often use. So why don't we just use moisture sensors? Moisture sensors are great, they make sense to people, a moisture reading. But the readings change depending on where you put the probe into the pot. It's not an absolute measurement. The moisture measurement will change depending on the type of media that you put it in, the angle that you put it in, and where you put it in the pot. There's also no drain information, so it's not possible to determine how much drain the crop is really getting, which is an important factor to ensure that there's evenness throughout the block during the drain period. It's not an absolute measurement like the GroScale where 1 gram equals 1 mil. The moisture sensor can be calibrated to tell you that it's more wet or more dry depending on your preference because it's not an absolute measurement. In summary, moisture sensors are a great tool, especially for monitoring, but they're not 100% reliable. The Priva moisture balance module was originally designed around the use of moisture sensors. But once the scale was developed, growers noticed a significant increase in yield due to the benefits that the scale has over moisture sensors. Thank you for your time in listening to this presentation, and if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact us at PowerPlants.